The idea that a four-engined heavy bomber could hunt ships at point-blank range was born not in a briefing room, but in the sweltering heat of northern Australia in late 1942, where the 5th Air Force was fighting a naval war without a navy. Convoys from Rabaul were slipping down the Bismarck Sea unhindered, delivering troops, ammunition, and fuel to Lae and Salamaua, supplies that kept the Japanese foothold in New Guinea alive. Traditional high-altitude bombing simply wasn't working. B-17s and B-24s dropped their bombs from 20,000 feet through cloud, haze, and unpredictable winds, scattering explosive patterns so wide that most bombs splashed harmlessly into the sea. Combat reports were blunt, high-level bombing ineffective against moving ships. And so General George C. Kenney, newly appointed commander of the 5th Air Force, demanded a solution. He didn't care whether it broke the rules of aerial warfare, he just needed something that worked. That something came from a wild, almost reckless idea championed by maverick officers like Ken McCullough and the legendary technician pilot Paul "Pappy" Gunn. Fly the bombers low, dangerously low, then throw the bombs at the ships like skipping stones across a pond. If done correctly, a 500 or 1,000-pound bomb would bounce once, twice, or even 3 times, then slam into the hull just above the waterline and detonate inside the ship. If done incorrectly, the bomber would disintegrate in a wall of water and steel. It sounded suicidal, it sounded impossible, and it was exactly what Kenney wanted. Through late 1942, trials began at Townsville and Port Moresby. Crews of the 90th Bomb Group, Jolly Rogers, took their massive B-24 Liberators to the sea and practiced flying so low that their propellers kicked spray off the waves. The Liberator was enormous, 67-foot wingspan, 20-ton takeoff weight, and pushing it down to 50 to 150 feet was like forcing a whale to skim the surface. But the pilots persisted. They learned to read the chop of the water, to stabilize the aircraft with tiny rudder inputs, to hold speed around 220-250 knots, and to release the bomb at exactly the right moment. At too high an angle, the bomb would plunge straight into the sea. At too low an angle, it might bounce too hard, skip over the ship, or worse, hit the B-24 itself. But when it worked, the effect was devastating. Early tests recorded bombs skipping across the water like flat stones, smashing into derelict target ships with astonishing precision. The shock waves from each strike sent spray towers 20 feet into the air. Kenney watched one demonstration and reportedly said, "This is the answer. This will break the Japanese." Meanwhile, Japanese pilots and naval officers remained unaware of the evolution happening across the Coral Sea. Their intelligence reports described American heavy bombers as high-altitude, long-range threats, dangerous to bases and airfields, but nearly useless against maneuvering ships. To them, the B-24 was far too large and sluggish to descend into the domain of destroyers and anti-aircraft guns. After all, no sane pilot would fly a heavy bomber under 1,000 feet within range of Type 96 25mm guns. The Japanese were about to be proven catastrophically wrong. By January 1943, the 90th Bomb Group had refined skip bombing into a deadly art. They installed extra nose-mounted 50-caliber guns to rake ship decks during the attack run. Crews trained to approach from upsun, hugging wave tops, throttles wide open. Navigators memorized the silhouettes of Japanese transports, destroyers, and escorts. Bombardiers practiced timing their releases down to fractions of a second. The B-24 had become something entirely new. Not a strategic bomber, but a low-level maritime strike weapon, fast, brutal, and terrifying. All Kenney needed was the right opportunity to unleash it. That opportunity arrived when reconnaissance detected a massive Japanese convoy leaving Rabaul on 28 February 1943. 8 transport ships, 8 destroyers, and nearly 7,000 soldiers destined to reinforce Lae. If they arrived, Japan's grip on New Guinea would tighten. If they were destroyed, it could break Japanese hopes in the entire Southwest Pacific. As the convoy steamed toward the Huon Gulf under the cover of tropical storms, B-24s shadowed it from high altitude, relaying its position back to Port Moresby. Every mile it advanced brought it closer to the trap. And in the humid darkness of early March 1943, the B-24 crews prepared their aircraft, checked their fuses, polished their bombs, tested the nose guns, reviewed the release angles. They knew what flying low meant. They knew what one mistake meant, and yet they climbed into their aircraft without hesitation, because they also knew something else. Skip bombing was the only way to stop that convoy. When dawn broke over the Bismarck Sea on March 2, 1943, Japanese crews scanning the horizon expected to see high-flying bombers. Instead, they saw nothing, just calm water, distant cloud bands, and the faint hum of engines they could not place. They had no idea that the B-24s were already inbound, already descending, already preparing to attack at a height no Japanese sailor ever expected a Liberator to survive. The transformation of the B-24 Liberator from a high-flying strategic bomber into a ship-killing predator did not happen overnight. It was forged through months of brutal, low-altitude training, mechanical improvisation, and a level of flying so dangerous that even veteran pilots admitted later they had expected to die during practice, long before they ever saw combat over the Bismarck Sea. At airfields like Townsville, Charters Towers, Port Moresby, and Iron Range, the men of the 90th Bomb Group and the 5th Air Force lived in a world where the difference between innovation and suicide was measured in feet, often fewer than 50. Every morning, the B-24 crews rose before dawn, engines coughing awake in the darkness as armorers loaded 500 and 1,000-pound bombs that had been modified with delayed fuses to allow them to penetrate a ship's hull before detonating. The air crews knew that these bombs were designed to survive a violent impact. They also knew that if the timing or angle were wrong, those same bombs could bounce back up and annihilate the aircraft that released them. But General Kenny had made his expectations clear. You will master low-level attack, or the Japanese will run the seas forever. And so they trained. Again and again, the Liberators plunged down toward the water, giant shadows skimming the surface, turbo-supercharged engines roaring, wings trembling as the slipstream tore at the metal. Pilots held the big aircraft steady at altitudes as low as 60 feet, some barely above the height of a coconut tree. Spray from the sea slapped the bomb bay doors. Bombardiers practiced estimating slant angles so precisely that a half-second error could mean overshooting by 100 yards. Navigators kept their eyes glued to the coastline, marking reefs, headlands, and islands that could be used to mask approach routes. They trained to attack from every direction, up sun to blind gunners, downwind to close distance faster, low over wave troughs to escape early detection. B-24 crews learned to fly on the step, maintaining a delicate balance of lift and speed just above stall margin to hold the aircraft steady. They practiced in rough seas, calm waters, fog, tropical storms, because in the Pacific, conditions changed constantly, and a B-24 had to be ready to strike whether the world was glassy smooth or boiling with whitecaps. As the pilots mastered the fundamentals, Pappy Gunn and his ordnance men modified the aircraft to suit their new role. The B-24's greenhouse nose, once designed for Norden bombsight precision at high altitude, was reinforced for low-level stability. Additional forward-firing 50-caliber machine guns were installed, so the Liberators could strafe the decks of transports and destroyers during their approach, suppressing anti-aircraft gunners long enough to survive the run-in. Allied intelligence had identified the threat clearly. Japanese transports often carried batteries of Type 96 25mm guns, capable of spewing a lethal volume of fire. To counter this, B-24 gunners trained to open up with synchronized bursts during the attack run, sweeping the decks in golden arcs of tracer fire, even as the bombardier counted down the seconds to release. The new skip bombing technique required absolute discipline. At 230 to 250 knots, the pilot held altitude while the bombardier called out distance. 1,000 yards, steady. 800, 700, 600, hold it, 500, release. At that moment, the bomb tumbled from the bay, skipped across the water like a stone thrown by a giant, and slammed into the hull of the target. Delayed fuses ignited a split second later, ripping open fuel stores, ammunition lockers, and troop compartments. At least, that was what happened in practice. During training, bombs occasionally skipped too high and sailed over targets. Sometimes they dug into the water and vanished.
and on more than one terrifying occasion, a bomb bounced too close to the B-24, forcing pilots to yank the aircraft up in a steep, gut-wrenching climb, while gunners screamed warnings over the intercom. One crew reported a near miss so close that the concussion rocked the aircraft sideways and shattered 2 cabin windows. But they kept training, because they knew what this tactic meant. Japan's supply lines, lifeblood of the New Guinea campaign, could be severed with speed and violence no traditional bombing method could match. While the B-24s trained, the Japanese Navy continued to assume the Americans would strike from altitude. Intelligence officers in Rabaul briefed convoy commanders that Allied heavy bombers were accurate only when ships sailed in straight lines at predictable speeds. They warned captains to zigzag during daylight hours and rely on cloud cover and destroyer escorts to protect their transports. No one, absolutely no one, imagined that heavy bombers would descend to mast height and attack like torpedo planes. By early 1943, B-24 practice runs against derelict hulks, grounded freighters, and even purpose-built wooden targets produced results so effective that observers initially refused to believe the accuracy reports. One test showed B-24 crews hitting dummy hulls with 60 to 70% accuracy, an almost impossible number for any high-altitude bombardier crew. And the pilots were improving every week. The tactic was now ready. What the men needed was a real enemy convoy, something big, something critical that would prove to Japan that skip bombing wasn't just a trick, but a weapon that could change the course of the war. That target appeared in late 1943 when coded Japanese communications revealed the departure of a major convoy from Rabaul. 8 transports, 8 destroyers, nearly 7,000 troops bound for Lai. For Japan, this convoy was reinforcement. For Kenny, it was destiny. He ordered every trained Liberator crew to prepare. Bombs armed, fuses timed, guns tested, altimeters set for terrifyingly low numbers. The men of the 90th Bomb Group didn't need a speech. They had trained for this moment for months, risking their lives not against the enemy, but against the unforgiving mathematics of altitude, speed, weight, and water. Now the real test was coming. Before they reached the Bismarck Sea, many of them quietly wondered the same thing. Would skip bombing work against real ships, firing real guns, in real combat? They wouldn't have to wait long to find out.
At dawn on 2 March 1943, as the first streaks of light broke across the Bismarck Sea, a lone B-24 from the 321st Squadron swept over the water on a reconnaissance run and spotted what every crewman in 5th Air Force had been waiting for, a massive Japanese convoy, 8 transport ships and 8 destroyers, moving southeast from Rabaul toward Leh in a tight defensive formation. They were carrying nearly 7,000 troops, veterans of the 51st and 102nd Infantry Regiments, determined to reinforce New Guinea. Their commanders believed they were well protected by cloud cover, destroyer screen, and the certainty that American heavy bombers could only attack from above. Their confidence would last another 24 hours. The first Allied attacks came on 3rd March, when B-17s flying at medium altitude pounded the convoy, smashing the bridge of the transport Kyokusei Maru and forcing survivors to abandon ship. But the real blow was scheduled for the following day, when 5th Air Force's skip bombing groups, B-25s, A-20s, and the B-24 Liberators of the 90th Bomb Group would strike low, fast, and with a violence no Japanese sailor had seen before. At 9:30 a.m. on 4th March, the clouds over the Bismarck Sea parted like curtains being drawn back, revealing the convoy in perfect visibility. Japanese destroyer lookouts scanned the sky, expecting contrails at high altitude. Instead, they heard only distant engines. Then they saw them, black dots on the horizon, growing larger, dropping lower, skimming the water. The Japanese officers froze. Heavy bombers were not supposed to fly like this. They were not supposed to come in at 200 to 250 feet, guns blazing, bomb bay doors open. Yet that was exactly what the B-24s were doing. The first wave came from the north. 12 Liberators roared in line abreast, their wings nearly touching the waves, salt spray blasting the underside of the fuselage. Gunners opened fire with their nose-mounted 50-caliber guns, ripping into the decks of the transports and suppressing the Type 96 25mm gunners who tried desperately to track them. Tracer fire from Japanese destroyers lit the air like a swarm of fireflies, but the B-24s came on anyway, undeterred, engines screaming as their pilots held formation tighter than training had ever demanded. A B-24 of the 320th Squadron lined up on the transport Teo Maru. The bombardier braced himself, waiting for the fleeting, perfect moment. 600 yards, steady. 500, release. The bomb dropped, skipped twice, and slammed into the starboard side beneath the waterline. A column of flame erupted as ammunition stores cooked off. Within minutes, the Teo Maru was burning from bow to stern. The second B-24 lined up on the Oigawa Maru, its captain trying to zigzag, but zigzagging was useless against a bomb that bounced like a skipping stone. The Liberator released 2 bombs. One skipped over the bow, but the second struck midships and detonated deep inside the hold. The ship slowed, then stopped, smoke pouring from every hatch. Meanwhile, the B-25s and A-20s swarmed in from the east, strafing relentlessly, raking decks, killing gunners before they could swing their cannons toward the low-flying libs. A B-24 attacking from the southeast hit the Kembu Maru with a skip bomb that penetrated directly under the forward cargo bay. Survivors later reported the explosion blew men into the sea in pieces. The kill came fast. The Japanese destroyers Hatsuyuki, Asashio, and Arashio tried counterattacks, unleashing walls of 25mm fire and performing sharp turns that sent white spray shooting skyward. But they were too slow. Heavy bombers flying at mast height were targets only for seconds, and most gunners couldn't track fast enough to land a hit. At 10:12 a.m., one Liberator made a perfect run against the Shinai Maru, its bombardier releasing a single 1,000-pound bomb at under 400 yards, so close that the navigator yelled, "We're too low." The bomb skipped once and slammed into the hull just as the B-24 pulled up at the last possible second. The shockwave lifted the ship out of the water and split its midsection. It went under in less than 10 minutes. Throughout the attack, Japanese pilots in escorting Zeros scrambled to respond, diving down to engage the Liberators. But Zeros designed for turning combat could not match aircraft that refused to dogfight. The B-24s didn't turn, they ran low and fast, using raw speed to break contact. A Zero diving at 300 miles per hour simply couldn't keep up with a B-24 making 250 knots at sea level. Once the bomber passed the convoy, it was untouchable. By 11 a.m., the battle was essentially over. Only a few Japanese transports remained afloat, and they were burning, listing, or dead in the water. The sea around them was littered with debris, lifeboats, and hundreds of Japanese soldiers struggling in the water as Allied aircraft strafed barges and rescue attempts. Lieutenant General Imamura at Rabaul sent a frantic message ordering destroyers to pick up survivors, but American aircraft swarmed every attempt. When the final tally was recorded, the result stunned even Kenny. All 8 transports destroyed. 4 of 8 destroyer escorts sunk. Nearly 3,000 to 3,500 troops killed. Almost the entire reinforcement lost, and not a single attacking B-24 was shot down. For the Japanese, the shock was total. Their naval officers had believed American heavy bombers were clumsy giants, vulnerable and ineffective at low altitude. Instead, they had seen them transformed into maritime executioners, skipping bombs across the water with impossible accuracy, attacking with a precision and aggression no Japanese tactician had ever imagined. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea was over. The sea was burning, and skip bombing had just rewritten the rules of naval warfare in the Pacific.
The Battle of the Bismarck Sea ended in less than 48 hours, but its shockwaves rolled across the Pacific for months, reshaping strategy, rewriting doctrine, and terrifying every Japanese commander responsible for moving supplies across the water. What happened on 3-4 March 1943 was not simply a defeat, it was the violent collapse of Japan's ability to reinforce New Guinea by sea. And at the center of that collapse was skip bombing, a tactic so unexpected, so brutally effective, that Japanese officers initially refused to believe the after-action reports filed by their surviving destroyer captains. As the smoke still drifted over the Bismarck Sea, radio intercepts captured message after message from Japanese headquarters in Rabaul and the 8th Area Army. They all said the same thing. The convoy is gone. The troops are lost. Our ships have been destroyed. Rear Admiral Masatomi Kimura, who commanded the convoy, sent a terse and heartbreaking message just after sunset on 4th March. Enemy air attack overwhelming. Convoy annihilated. In Tokyo, the Naval General Staff read the reports with disbelief. For years, Japanese planners had built their naval doctrine around two assumptions: that Japan's anti-aircraft guns could defend convoys from low-altitude threats, and that Allied heavy bombers would always attack from high altitude. The Bismarck Sea shattered both assumptions. For the first time, the Japanese understood that the Americans were not bound by the rulebook. They had rewritten it. In the days following the battle, Japanese officers interviewed survivors from the Asashio, Arashio, and Shikinami, destroyers that had attempted rescue operations during the attack. What they learned stunned them. Survivors described liberators flying so low that their propellers cut the tops off waves, bombs that bounced like stones and detonated beneath the hull, and .50 caliber fire so intense that deck crews were mowed down before they could swing their guns. A wounded gunner from the Oigawa Maru told investigators, "The bombs did not fall, they leapt. There was no time to aim, no time to evade." Another sailor wrote that the B-24s attacked like torpedo planes, but faster and without fear. True fear spread when the Japanese Navy realized this wasn't a one-time trick, but a repeatable tactic, and that the Americans had trained for months to perfect it. Meanwhile, at Port Moresby and Dobodura, 5th Air Force held debriefings of its own. The results were undeniable. Skip bombing was no longer an experiment, it was doctrine. Staff officers compiled combat footage, bomb impact photos, and gun camera reels showing transports shattering under low-level hits. Kenny forwarded the analysis to General MacArthur with a simple note: "This tactic will end enemy supply by sea." Kenny was right. Within weeks, the Japanese recognized the true cost of Bismarck Sea. Not just the ships lost, not just the 3,000-plus soldiers who drowned or burned, but the strategic consequence. Japan could no longer use large daylight convoys in the Southwest Pacific. They tried smaller night convoys, but B-24s flew night harassment skip attacks too, less accurate but deadly enough to disrupt movement. They tried sending ships under heavy destroyer escort. The Liberators and B-25s simply hit the transports first, ignoring the escorts. They tried hugging coastlines. American pilots skipped bombs into cliff sides, using the rebound angles to strike ships that had attempted to hide. No tactic worked. Japanese diaries from Leh recorded despair. "You cannot fight against bombs that bounce." Meanwhile, Allied intelligence intercepted communications that revealed a collapsing logistical network. One encrypted message sent from Leh to Rabaul on 10th March openly admitted resupply by sea is impossible. And as New Guinea starved, Allied momentum accelerated. Throughout mid-1943, the 5th Air Force launched continuous air-sea interdiction operations against Japanese shipping. Salamaua, Finnshafen, Wevak, and Madang all fell victim to low-level attacks. B-24s and B-25s ranged across the Huon Gulf and Dampier Strait like wolves, prowling for convoys forced to move at night or hide in coves. When radar-equipped B-24s joined the hunt, even night wasn't safe. In one operation near Cape Gloucester, a B-24 detected a convoy hiding beneath coastal overhangs. Guided by radar, the crew approached at 150 feet, saw the ship only seconds before impact, and released a pair of 500-pound bombs. Both struck the target. The ship exploded in a fiery column that lit the water for miles. As Japan struggled to adjust, Allied pilots refined their technique even further. They standardized skip angles, defined ideal release speeds, and trained bombardiers in reflexive timing. Aircraft that returned from missions provided invaluable data: where to aim, how far from the hull to release, how different sea states affected bounce. By mid-1943, skip bombing accuracy remained so high that even skeptical Navy commanders admitted the Air Force controls the sea. Perhaps the most dramatic shift occurred in Japanese air doctrine. Before Bismarck Sea, Japanese Zero pilots believed they could easily counter Allied heavy bombers. But in the battle itself, Zeros that attempted interception discovered that liberators skimming the waves could not be caught. Diving downward at high speed was dangerous, and pulling out in time was nearly impossible. For the first time, Japanese pilots reported frustration and fear against heavy bombers. One Zero pilot wrote in his logbook, "The big four-engine planes moved like fighters. I could not follow." As the months passed, Japan's supply lines to Leh, Salamaua, and Wewak collapsed entirely. Soldiers on the front began dying not from combat, but from starvation and disease. Convoys that once carried ammunition and reinforcements were replaced by small barges creeping along the coast at night, slow, vulnerable, and pitifully inadequate. Australian and American patrol aircraft hunted these too. By late 1943, even barge traffic had become suicidal. Skip bombing had not just destroyed a single convoy, it had destroyed an entire strategy, and Tokyo knew it. In an internal Navy memorandum months later, a Japanese commander concluded with rare honesty, "After the disaster in the Bismarck Sea, the enemy's air tactics surpassed our ability to resist. We no longer control the waters of New Guinea." The tide in the Southwest Pacific had turned, and it had turned because B-24 crews dared to fly lower than anyone thought possible.
Japan never fully recovered from the shattering defeat it suffered in the Bismarck Sea. And the proof of that defeat continued to unfold throughout 1944 and 1945 as Allied air forces pushed across New Guinea, the Philippines, and into the Netherlands East Indies. Skip bombing, first unleashed by the B-24s and B-25s of the 5th Air Force, did not remain a one-time innovation. It became a sustained doctrine, a weapon that turned the entire Southwest Pacific into an air-controlled killing zone where Japanese convoys simply could not survive. And long after the last ship sank beneath the waves, the legacy of that tactic continued shaping air power for generations. The strategic consequences became clear almost immediately. With the convoy to Leh destroyed and thousands of troops lost in March 1943, Japan's forward bases in New Guinea began to starve. Ammunition, food, spare parts, medicine, everything the front line needed became nearly impossible to deliver. Japan attempted to reroute supply lines using night convoys and smaller formations. They tried hugging coastlines. They tried running barges along mangrove-lined channels. They even attempted to disguise ships as island silhouettes by painting fake coastlines on their hulls. None of it worked. Skip bombing didn't care about camouflage or zigzagging. It only required one thing: a ship within visual range. And in the tropical waters of the Southwest Pacific, that meant almost every ship, every night, every dawn, every dusk. B-24s continued flying low-level interdiction missions into late 1943 and early 1944, hitting convoys off Madang, Hansa Bay, Wewak, and Manus. When General MacArthur launched Operation Cartwheel, the massive campaign to neutralize Rabaul, skip bombing played a central role. At Wewak in August 1943, where the Japanese had concentrated more than 150 aircraft, B-24s attacked fuel dumps, grounded planes, and supply barges. Many of the barges exploded after liberators skipped bombs directly into their hulls at night, using nothing more than moonlight and instinct. Meanwhile, Japanese diary entries tell the story of total collapse. One soldier at Finschhafen wrote, "We cannot eat rice. The bags rot. We cannot receive ammunition. The sea belongs to the enemy's planes." Another wrote, "Supplies have not come for 20 days. Those who go fishing do not return." Skip bombing had choked the arteries of Japan's New Guinea army. As 5th Air Force advanced into 1944, the tactic evolved further. By the time the Allies invaded Hollandia, Aitape, and Biak, skip bombing was an integrated element of combined arms operations.
B-25s and A-20s led the initial strikes, suppressing anti-aircraft positions, while B-24s attacked from both medium and low altitude, dropping bombs designed to ricochet into coves or under overhangs where Japanese ships hid. Radar-equipped B-24s hunted at night, sometimes picking up convoys so small that they had only a handful of barges linking entire Japanese divisions to their supply bases. One night in April 1944, a B-24 of the 380th Bomb Group detected a hidden barge convoy near Wakday Island. The crew descended to 150 feet in darkness, so thick the pilot later described the sea as a slab of black glass. They released 2 bombs that skipped once and struck a cluster of barges, setting them ablaze in seconds. Survivors leapt into the water, only to be strafed by the B-24 circling overhead. By this point, Japanese commanders no longer attempted large seaborne reinforcements. They knew what would happen. Bismarck Sea had shown that the enemy could destroy an entire convoy in minutes. But the need to move supplies remained, and so Japanese forces relied more and more on barges traveling close to shore. Even these were hunted mercilessly. In the Philippines campaign of late 1944, skip bombing again proved decisive. While Navy carrier aircraft hammered Japanese warships in Light Gulf, 5th Air Force B-24s struck supply lines heading toward Ormoc Bay. They intercepted convoys, barges, and even attempts to resupply via small coaster ships. One reconnaissance liberator spotted a Japanese coaster hugging cliffs near Mindoro. The attacking B-24 dropped to less than 100 feet, released 2 500-pound bombs, and watched both skip off the water and slam directly into the ship. It exploded so violently that debris waned across the coastline. By 1945, Japan had effectively ceased daytime shipping in the Southwest Pacific. Air superiority had given way to air domination, and skip bombing had made the sea more dangerous than land. When Japan attempted to reinforce Borneo, Balikpapan, or the Dutch East Indies, B-24s destroyed nearly every convoy before it reached port. In some cases, the liberators never needed to attack. Simply being spotted by a B-24 often caused convoy commanders to abort. The psychological effect was immense. Japanese Navy reports from 1945 describe skip bombing in stark terms. The enemy's low-altitude attack is impossible to counter. Our guns cannot track the target. The bombs behave unpredictably. Liberators appear at wave height and vanish before firing solutions can be calculated. Most tellingly, a Navy captain wrote, "We have lost the surface of the sea to the enemy's aircraft." After the war ended, Allied commanders studied skip bombing extensively. While the tactic never again played such a dominant role because no later conflict matched the geography of the Southwest Pacific, it left lasting lessons. Air power could control oceans. Heavy bombers could be used as naval strike aircraft. Tactical innovation could cripple an enemy not by sinking battleships, but by destroying logistics. And most importantly, an air force that experimented, adapted, and embraced unconventional ideas could rewrite warfare. In museums today, B-24 liberators are usually remembered for their role in Europe, Ploesti, Regensburg, the oil campaign. But in the Pacific, they were something far stranger and far more frightening. Giant predators, hunting ships at mast height, skipping bombs like stones across tropical waters, turning entire convoys into floating pyres. The Japanese pilots who witnessed it never forgot the shock of seeing a heavy bomber flying lower than a torpedo plane. The sailors who survived often described it as surreal, as if the laws of physics had been suspended. And for the 5th Air Force crews who flew those missions, skip bombing became a symbol of everything they represented: daring, improvisation, and relentless aggression. They were not bound by the old rules. They made new ones, and won the war by doing so.